Hello and welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is author Neal Lipschutz. We're going to be talking to him about his new book, Long Over the Past, which is a sequel to No Right Way to Die. Neal, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Now, before we get to talking to Neal and about his books and his background, we're going to talk about anything we may have read or watched recently, if we liked it or we did not like it, or don't want to have anything to do with it ever again. I will go first just to give Neal some time to collect his thoughts, and he's got a lot of time because I got a lot of stuff to talk about. So I've had the chance to read two items. One I read a couple of weeks ago. I just forgot to mention it. It is a Western. I think it's from the 40s, maybe the early 50s, called The Hellbent Kid. I just had seen positive things about it on Amazon, so I got a copy of that. And I enjoyed it. And it was what's clever about it is that it's written very much from someone who doesn't seem to have an education, but it also seems very appropriate for like the 1850s, 1860s time frame. So a lot of grammatical errors and spelling errors, but it's all intentional. God, I hope it is. But I enjoyed it. I didn't love it. It's also, I think it's like on the top 25 or the top 50 Western novels of the 20th century. I don't know if I would agree with that. I enjoyed it, but not to that extent. I'm also currently reading, this was a Father's Day gift for me, When Caesar Was King. It's about Sid Caesar and how he came to be, and Your Show of Shows and Caesar's Hour in the 50s, the golden age of television. Fascinating stuff, complicated guy. Lots of input from Mel Brooks, as one would expect, since he was one of the writers. And I had the chance to watch three films. Did not see it in IMAX, but saw it at my local neighborhood theater. I saw The Odyssey, really liked it. Flew by just shy of 3 hours, but goes very fast. Very well done film. My daughter and I went to see Spider-Man, Brand New Day. Really enjoyed it, but I'm biased. I like comic book movies. That was a lot of fun. I thought it was really well done. And on the total opposite end of that, just because I'd heard good things about it, and it was better than it was supposed to be, was Masters of the Universe, also known as the He-Man movie, which came and bombed spectacularly earlier summer. Boy, that was really bad. It was just a lot of cheese and some really bad dialogue. And my wife and I kept saying to each other as we're watching it, somebody actually got paid to write this, and it had four writers on it. So, if proceed with caution. I think that's probably the best thing I can say about that. That one I do not ever need to see again. That's it on my end. Neal, what about you? Anything good, bad on the reading and or watching fronts?
Yeah, so recently I read a mystery novel that was called The End Writes Itself by two writers who used a pen name, Evelyn Clark, for it. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it was very well done. It has the setting that many mysteries do, in the sense that it takes a group of strangers, puts them in an isolated place together without real communications with the world. And the difference here, and the interesting layer upon a very good mystery, was that they're all writers there, and they have none of them have hit the super big time commercially. None of them have had that kind of success. And there's a circumstance, I don't want to give away too much about it,
Sure.
but there's a circumstance where one of those writers, all of whom are insecure and ambitious, might have an opportunity to sort of move into the next level of success. And of course, that competition leads to the kinds of things that often happen in mysteries. Some people fall away. And I thought it was just very cleverly done, and also some interesting insights and a look at what it's like to try to write and to be successful in this day and age. So I thought that was very good. I also recently read London Falling by Patrick Keefe on the nonfiction
Mhm.
front, and that I also thought was very well done. A great, thorough piece of reporting, well researched, well written, that looks from every angle imaginable, including somewhat historically, this sort of mysterious and unfortunate death of a young man in London in 2019. So those two I read recently, and both I would recommend. I thought they were both very good in their own very different ways.
Hmm.
So that's my report. On watching, I did recently see the Netflix series The Beast in Me, which is a thriller. Uh,
Okay.
Again, it's about a writer is one of the main characters, and there's a real estate mogul, and there's the possibility of the writer writing his life story. He's a very controversial figure, and of course, sort of dark things happen after that. And I thought that was well done as well.
I was going to say there's a theme of you reading or watching something that has a writer as a as a character.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't have any in my novels, but it is interesting how many works of art, whether they're novels or television or film, do feature writers as a protagonist. It might be an example of that old edict of write what you know, and it's
I really liked your
like writers writing about writers, you know.
I loved your description of the first book. You said they're all the writers are all insecure yet ambitious. I thought, well, that really sums up almost every writer.
Yeah,
That is great. Okay, so
all
uh,
pretty well. I enjoyed all of those.
oh, fantastic, great. So Neil, before we get to talking about you, I'm gonna read the about the author, which is on the back of your Long Arm of the Past novel. Neal Lipschutz is the author of No Right Way to Die, which is his previous book. He formerly served as deputy editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal and also was its standards editor. He also was formerly top editor at Dow Jones Newswrites. This is Long Over the Past is his second novel in a series of mysteries. Neil, you also described it as a thriller, so we'll call it a mystery slash thriller, which I think is a rather apropos way to sum it up. So, Neil, let's talk a little bit about you. I mean, it kind of touches on it in your bio that you worked for the Wall Street Journal, but how did you get your start as a writer? Not really as a journalist, but more as a writer. I mean, were you a voracious reader as a child? Is writing something you came to a little bit later in life? And also, was it kind of that? You're reading something you thought this is terrible. I could do a much better job at this, and said I'm going to give it a try.
Well, let's start. We'll start with my reading, which is voracious. That's a great word for it. Has been my whole life, and I'm a pretty eclectic reader as well. And I've enjoyed mysteries for a very long time, but I also have read quite regularly literary fiction and other genres, and at the same time, nonfiction and American history have been staples of my lifelong reading as well. So pretty mixed, but certainly voracious and quite regular on reading. As you noted, I have had I'm fortunate to have a long career in journalism, mostly as an editor, but as a reporter and writer early in my career. But somewhere, somewhere inside me, if you will, I've had the long-standing desire to try fiction. I have written some short literary stories, some literary short fiction over the years, but felt with kind of the broad responsibilities that I had in my career, family responsibilities, other things that I didn't really have the time to give a full try to writing fiction at length, both at the novel form, but also at length, meaning making it my primary preoccupation. And it really was not until retirement a few years ago that I was able to make that switch and to make writing fiction and writing these novels and other novels that are in the works, really the center of my days.
Hmm.
As
Okay.
far as reading something and saying I could do better, that one I haven't really. Obviously, I've read some things that I was less than thrilled with over the years, but that wasn't the impetus. It really has been a long-standing desire to try my hand at writing fiction after a long career in fact-based journalism.
Sure, sure. So what I'd like to ask the guest is that so for screenwriting, it's the elevator pitch. You get on an elevator. Steven Spielberg, big studio exec is there. You've got 5 seconds to sum up your story. So I would like you for authors. It is the cocktail party pitch. So you're at a cocktail party, and someone comes up to you and says, Neil, I heard about you. You've got this new book, Long Arm of the Past. Tell me, what is it about? And you say.
I say Scott Morgan, a late middle-aged, successful management consultant who has lived a life of material success, but also one of dubious ethics at time, finds himself at the center of a new investigation after the abrupt retirement and then sudden death of the ex-chairman of the consulting firm that he has worked for decades. Against all odds, he summons his nemesis from the first book, No Right Way to Die, Delmore Kurbich, who in the first book was a New York Police Department homicide detective, is now a private investigator. And because Scott wants to get to the bottom of the death of the chairman of the firm, he knows Delmore has the skills to help him get there. The problem is there are secrets because of some of the dubious actions Scott took in No Right Way to Die that he needs to desperately protect. And unbeknownst to him, when he starts on this mission, those secrets start to bubble up, and Delmore finds out more than Scott is comfortable with, and that threatens this carefully structured life for Scott and his family that he's constructed.
Okay, yeah, it's great. I had the chance to read both No Right Way to Die and Long Arm of the Past. Of course, I read them sequentially, as one should. So, Long Arm of the Past is pretty much almost an immediate sequel to No Right Way to Die. So let's go back to your first book, No Right Way to Die. What was the inspiration for the story? I mean, that I guess it sounds like maybe you started working on it after retirement, and you thought, okay, I have this idea for a story, but like, what was the inspiration for it? I mean, a lot of it, because you said you worked for the Wall Street Journal, so maybe you had a lot of access and exposure to this kind of world, the management consultants of New York. Did just seeing all of that kind of like play out in front of you, was that the inspiration, or was it from something totally different?
It actually was something totally different. As I mentioned earlier, I had been writing some short fiction, and I had an idea for a short story, and it was about two men who grew up, excuse me, in the same sort of old neighborhood in Brooklyn, um, and both being ambitious in very different ways, one through business, one through writing and art, um, managed to leave that neighborhood and make successes of themselves in certain ways, and in late middle age, many years later, find themselves in conflict. That was my original idea. And I did grow up in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and in No Right Way to Die in particular, there are elements, obviously fictional elements, of that place, or a place like that in a parallel fictional universe, if you will. And so that, I think, actually informs the book in some very basic way, if you will. You're right, though, as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal and at Dow Jones Newswires for many years, I've read about and edited and been involved in journalism that was about power and money, and sometimes the things people are willing to do to get those things. Also, I was interested in the path to come from reasonably modest means, and to make that make that journey to affluence. And Scott Morgan lives in Scarsdale, which is an affluent suburb of New York City in Westchester County, which is not that many miles away from where he grew up, but
Hmm.
psychically it's really another world. And I
Hmm.
was I was interested in that as well, and I hope that comes across in both novels. The complexity of the New York metropolitan area, and frankly, true, I'm sure, of many big cities and their surrounding suburban areas, how places that are geographically very close to each other can be, can, can consist of very different worlds despite that geographic proximity.
Yeah, I was going to say I could totally relate to that because my father grew up in Brooklyn and like right after the Depression, and so he and his older brother, my uncle, they both my grandfather who emigrated from Europe around like, in the 20s made sure that his sons like they didn't have Brooklyn accents.
Ah,
My uncle a little bit more, but he also made sure that they went to school. My dad became a doctor. My uncle became a nuclear physicist, and,
wow.
and so and then my dad, after getting out of the Navy, relocated to South Jersey. So we were like 90 miles from where he grew up, but he didn't, reminisce about it. He didn't speak of
Hmm.
those days fondly. He was like, that's in the past. This is the present kind of thing. But that great dichotomy between the two worlds for Scott, I think that was fascinating that it really plays a big part of his personality, which I thought was a fascinating touch that he's in Scarsdale, but there's still a part of him that's almost like still connected to Brooklyn that he can't, he does, I'm not sure if he can't let go of it or he doesn't want to. It's a great conflict, which is the basis for any great story. I also wanted to ask you, as kind of we touched on, so in No Right Way to Die, Scott Morgan is the protagonist, and Delmore. I'm gonna keep getting his name wrong. Delmore is the, I don't know if I'd call him the antagonist. He's definitely he's like almost kind of like the Javert to Jean Valjean. He's always after him. He's trying to find something. But then the mystery resolves without doing any spoilers. And then when we get to Long Arm of the Past, that it's almost seems like an inevitable result that they would team up. Was that your intent to after you finished No Right Way to Die and you're okay, I'm going to start on this new one, that what would be, I guess, like almost like the natural progression of things? Like, okay, I had this guy, he can't go through the same kind of thing and have the same police homicide detective breathing down his neck. What would be, I guess, the next evolution in that relationship? And like, oh, they're going to work together. And was that how you approached it, or were you trying to figure out like what could be the next step in this story series?
Yeah, no, I did approach it that way. I mean, I very much, enjoyed all the characters I've created, but I wanted in the second book, in particular, to give a broader stage to Delmore, and it did somehow. You used the word inevitable, which is great if that's how you felt about it. But I did want to bring the two of them back together. I think there was a lot of chemistry clashing, all those things going on at once. And I do think in some ways, Delmore, who does struggle with his own ethical issues in Long Arm of the Past, but in many ways is the opposite sort of morally
Mm.
to Scott, and I thought the two of them coming together, somewhat rubbing off on each other, would be pretty interesting. And I thought that, yes, having them as a team made a lot of sense, and frankly, it also made some sense if one thinks about it as a series with additional installments to come. That if they work together, that could be a path to the future books as well.
Sure, sure. And the one thing I noticed that, especially in No Right Way to Die, it's really a lot about Scott and all of the things that are going around him in that story. And Gilmore is not really, I guess to me, he didn't seem like the primary antagonist, but he was one of many. And then as we get into Long Arm of the Past, it starts out being about Scott, but then almost the focus shifts over to Delmore, and it's more about his investigating and using his police contacts and all of his knowledge and tricks of the trade to figure things out. That we really get a lot more about Delmore, and not that Scott fades into the background, but it's more about Delmore's doing all the legwork and all the investigating, which is his thing. And I just thought it was an interesting transition or shift, if you want to call it that, from we go from Scott, and then it's Scott and Delmore, and then it's a lot more about Delmore. Now, was it that just the natural progression for the story, or do you think, okay, Delmore has a lot more to do than Scott does?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things, and I think you've covered them pretty well. One is, as I said, I really wanted the reader to understand Delmore's backstory, and I
Mm.
wanted the reader to get more of a sense to him than just being a detective, and what motivated him, and some of the issues in his life that pushed him into somewhat reluctantly working with Scott, who he doesn't trust in many ways.
Hmm.
So I did want to just give that broader stage to Delmore. But you hit on it too. One of the interesting issues from a writing standpoint, and I am trying to write what I would imagine you would call realistic or naturalistic fiction,
Hmm.
meaning, there are no supernatural entities, there are no dragons that jump down, there are no other dimensions. Obviously, it's made up and obviously it's fiction. But, by definition, and I hope I got that across in No Right Way to Die, that even though Scott launches his own investigation, it is an amateur investigation.
Hmm.
In the second book, as you alluded to, Delmore is the person with the experience, and while he's certainly not perfect, he needs to have more space in the book because he, by definition, would be the person with the knowledge to lead the actual investigation.
Yeah, actually, that's something you touched on that I really thought was a great part of both books was that you add just enough details to the writing for both the characters and the story that it feels a lot more grounded, that it feels very realistic, like this could actually happen. Now, is that just the way you write, or is that something that you were trying to approach, or was it maybe like, okay, solve the mystery first, then go back and start, fleshing things out a little bit? I just would love to hear like how you were able to do that, and if is that just the Neal Lipschutz style, or is that just like that's more applicable to these books?
I think it's the Neal Lipschutz style, by and large. I also very much, in No Way to Die, perhaps in particular, but I think carries over into the second book. I really wanted New York and that the broader metropolitan area to almost be a character.
Mm.
That to me, it's such a, and obviously it's such a large and diverse and changeable place that I'm only talking about and fictionalizing slices of it, small slices of it. But in the second book, there are some scenes that take place on Eastern Long Island, and there are some that take place in Queens as opposed to Brooklyn. So I broadened out a little bit, but I think that because I was interested in New York and its broader surroundings to be central, that realism, if you will, with obviously hoping the reader does suspend disbelief and isn't going to, try to pick apart things that are obviously fictional. But I want the things to be plausible. And I think it's just, when it comes to the mystery thriller genre, those are the kind of books I like best. That have a sheen of realism, even though that some of the things don't quite make it into the real world. But I do think it's just it comes naturally to me when I sit down to write fiction to write it in a way that uh, makes it plausible. Because
Mm.
one thing I think, especially when you're writing mystery, suspense, thrillers, you don't want something to jump out at someone to be so unrealistic
Mm.
as that it stops them and takes them out of the story. So like you say, it doesn't have to be something that it just has to be credible or plausible. But if something becomes implausible, I think it might hurt the reading experience for the reader.
Sure, sure. I totally get that. And actually, yeah, that's something you raise a great point that I wanted to ask you about that. So, at its heart, these two books are both mysteries. And so, what was your process for putting the mystery aspect of the story together? I mean, you had the problem. Did you know what the solution was from the outset, or did it take you time to figure that out? But also, it's that finding the trail of breadcrumbs along the way, like, okay, here's the problem, and the investigation starts, leads to this clue, which leads to that clue, which leads to that witness, et cetera, and then all the pieces start falling into place. What is your process for putting that together? And also, did you have to make sure that everything linked together is, as you said, in a very plausible and realistic way? You suddenly couldn't have, all of a sudden, this character we've never seen before, comes up and says, "Wait, that's my father," that sort of thing.
Right. So yeah, no, that's a very good question and good points. I think I start with the story, and I should step back for 1 second and say that perhaps, and I don't know if this is true or not, but perhaps unlike many other devotees of the mystery genre, when I read a mystery, I'm not constantly trying to guess who done it.
Hmm.
I enjoy complex characters. I enjoy the interplay of those characters. Sure, a propulsive story that moves you along is very important, but I care more about sort of the complexity and the human aspects than just finding out what happened. Excuse me. So I think in both these books, I've tried to write those kind of novels. And therefore, I really started with the characters, and yes, certainly what the so-called inciting incident is, and how it would be resolved. And some of it is a matter of going back, and after you've got a draft or even a second or third draft, tweaking, inserting, changing chronology perhaps a little bit to make the thing more cohesive and to have, as you say, some perhaps earlier breadcrumbs and some possible, red herrings as
Mm.
well, that look like that's how it might go, and then it goes in a different direction. On Long Arm of the Past, it was very late in the process that I actually altered the end. So I was,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it's a process that kind of keeps going on. And
Hmm.
that was actually after some input from my editor. And I thought it was very good advice and input. So it it's an iterative process as far as nailing down the mystery. And as you say, some of it to maintain plausibility is a matter when you're on, the umpteenth draft, which I have been on both these books,
Sure.
going back and just making sure things like the seasons are following each other in the right
Mm.
order, and that, that kind of consistency or throughout the plot is there.
Yeah, I was going to say that the fact that you said that you changed the ending, that makes me wonder, like, so as you're working out the story and maybe even like writing out the drafts, did you ever maybe like have a subplot or some kind of story development? Just you were thinking, okay, this just isn't working, it's not clicking for me, and then feel like, okay, I need to like find out, retrace my steps, find out where did things go wrong, or where did I take a wrong turn, and then just do you scrap that? Do you just figure out, okay, what's a better way I can get to the ending, but in a more unique and original way, and also something that's unexpected, because a lot of times that will play out in these kinds of stories.
Right. So I am conscious of trying to have some element of unexpected, but also something that does cohere to what happened up until that point, right? So that's a balance that I think you're trying to achieve when you're writing in this genre. But I also, there are parts that I've, as I said, especially perhaps in No Right Way to Die, where even after I had a draft, I went back and inserted some scenes and removed some scenes, but never really a kind of radical surgery, I don't think, where huge chunks of the book seemed like they didn't work. It was really more certain scenes just seemed that they weren't adding to the sum total of the reading experience, or maybe we're going off on a bit of a tangent, and it was, my choice to cut them. I also have kept both books reasonably short. I want them
Hmm.
to be taught, to and therefore, you know which a lot of people write about as good advice for writing anyway, that everything in them is serving a purpose of moving the story forward or helping readers understand the characters, is doing some important work.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things I did notice, that they're very relatively short and very fast reads. I think the first book's like 200 pages, the next one's 235. But what I also noticed was a lot of the chapters are on the shorter side, and maybe like 2 to 4 pages. But what's really interesting is a majority of the chapters end with some kind of cliffhanger or a big reveal, or here's something that is moving the plot forward. Now, was that just pre-planning on your part, or did you just figure out, okay, this chapter is going to end and this is going to end on a detail or a clue or a reveal that's going to lead, it's going to start opening up more avenues over the course of the rest of the story.
Yeah, I mean I'm aware of that, both the relative brevity of the chapters and that most of them end with something of a cliffhanger or a dramatic statement of some sort. And frankly, I really didn't do that overtly consciously. I think it just was part of my writing process, and I'm actually very glad of it, and like it, and thinks I think and hope it makes it a more compelling story. On a very practical level, I hope that the length of the chapters being relatively short, if you get to one of those cliffhangers, you'd be inclined as a reader to keep going. That the next chapter is not 30 pages, so it's not that daunting. If you're reading before going to sleep or something like that. But really, it came naturally, and the way I look at it is that there are obviously some transitions. So a chapter might start the next day or 1 week
Hmm.
later or something like that, but I did look at almost every chapter as a discrete scene. So I try to write that scene completely, and maybe naturally by doing that, it ends on a certain cliffhanger or a certain note because it's an ongoing suspenseful tale. But I would end on a scene, and then the next chapter is a new scene. So it just came about reasonably naturally without much pre-planning as far as how the chapters end.
That's right. That kind of raises the question. So while you were writing it, and say you finished a chapter, okay, here's the big reveal for this chapter. Did you just say, okay, I'm done for the day, and then you like kind of step away? The next day when you go back to sit down, you're like, okay, where am I starting? You look at the previous chapter. Ah, it ends here, and it either leads into something directly connected, or a lot of times that happens over the course of both stories is that we step into a different subplot or a different plot line. I mean, what is your approach to the writing aspect? Is it kind of like, okay, I'm going to focus on this storyline, or I'm going to work on this chapter. Here's the reveal. Okay, now I have to go back to subplot C and flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, like in both books to a degree, I did start with an outline, and
Hmm.
a very rough outline, and one that changes, and one where a lot gets added along the way. Um, I do try to, as you said, I do try to write at least a complete scene in a setting. And if things are going well, I might write more than one, but it is helpful. And I try usually not to end in the middle of a chapter. You're absolutely
Hmm.
right. I think that by ending that and sitting down the next morning, knowing, at least in a broad outline, what's going to happen in the chapter I'm now working on, I think helps make you more productive and keeps the words flowing. Um, and I do have a general idea 3 or 4 chapters ahead of what's going to happen. As far as deciding when to step back, shift gears to a subplot, as you said, or maybe say, okay, we've had 5 chapters of action.
Hmm.
Maybe now we ought to get some insight into what Scott Morgan is thinking and have a chapter that's more internal. Again, that happens to me a little bit organically, but
Hmm.
I am conscious of it after the draft is done and say, okay, maybe, I need to put this background chapter or internal dialogue or, some of the internal stresses a character is feeling in a different place just for my perceived momentum of the story.
Okay, no, I get that. I was also thinking that, maybe like we've had 3 chapters about Scott. Now it's time to figure, oh yeah, what's Delmore been up to,
Yes, and
this time,
absolutely.
or
And
what?
Long Gone with the Past, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, and Long Gone with
Oh,
the
that's
Past
okay.
is definitely a consideration. Absolutely.
Sure, sure. Okay, so without going into spoilers for
Mhm.
Long Arm of the Past, so the big reveal to me was a bit surprising. One of those, oh my gosh, didn't see that one coming. Is do you have to really work? especially when you're dealing with a mystery, that you have to present the clues and the reveals, but you also have to be careful about trying to not tip your hand. So you're not giving the reader enough information that they can get to chapter five and say, okay, I know who did it, or that sort of thing. Or granted, more details about the solution, if you will, are presented later on in the story. But you have to be careful when you're writing it to not give too much away to the reader.
I think that's right. And it's at least for me, and I obviously can only speak for myself, it's really hard to know if I'm getting that balance right because I'm the only judge, and obviously I usually do know what's going to happen, at least, ultimately I do. Um, so yes, and that's part of I think the revision and the editing afterwards is to fine tune that part to say, are you in a sense playing fair with the reader? Did you give enough clues or possibilities, or at least the protagonist thinking about a possible solution as to have it, when it is revealed, have it not come completely out of left field, have somebody say, oh, yeah, I remember, this was mentioned here and there. The other thing that I've done, and again, I can only speak for myself, and I think this is true in both books, I have, even though Delmore Curbage is an experienced homicide detective, now a private investigator in book two, both he and Scott, as investigators, are fallible human beings, so
Mm.
that one can follow as a reader and as me writing them the path that they seem to think is the most fruitful one. Um, and perhaps in the end, that without again trying to avoid spoilers, perhaps in the end, that was not the path, but for all sorts of obvious reasons, they followed that path. And so, it's almost like if your characters, which again, back to that realism and trying to create human like complexities, if your characters are not perfect, sometimes their own decisions about what looks like the most likely solution will provide that air of mystery and that surprise, perhaps closer to the finale.
Okay, the one thing I wanted to ask you is that a lot of times when a writer is creating characters, a lot of times, especially the primary characters in a story, are some reflection of an aspect of the writer's personality. So especially in Long Arm of the Past, you have Scott and you have Delmore. Would you say there are aspects of Neal, like is it like some kind like something about you is similar to something about Scott and or something similar comparable to in Delmore that like Scott is like this like he's got that part of my personality. Delmore is this part of my personality.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would look at it that way. I'm not sure. I don't think either is, particularly indicative. If I had to pick one, I would think most of my characteristics are perhaps more similar to Delmore, more sympathetic, or more in line with his worldview than Scott's. I did, when I created the character of Scott Morgan, I really was very consciously trying to create a fictional character that was very different than me.
Mhm.
Perhaps we shared that upbringing in a particular kind of neighborhood with the kind of stresses that he experiences and some of the trauma he goes through because of a family member. Um, but no, I don't. I was very conscious that Scott is very different, and I felt, especially in the first book, that he does some things that both myself as a writer and I imagine many readers would find abhorrent. And
Mhm.
I thought that was worth taking the risk of him not being likable in some respects, um, to be true to the complexity of human beings, and at least thinking that even if a reader is upset with him or revolted by some of the things he did, that they could at least identify with the human dilemma he faces about trying to protect a loved one and an adult child. So
Mhm.
that even if one said, "Oh, I would never do that," that's a terrible thing, which I agree with, you can at least, I think, say, wow, what a difficult situation that would
Mhm.
put any parent. So, so yeah, I don't think either one really reflects. I mean, one of the great things about writing fiction is being able to use your imagination and create characters who, have their own fictional lives and their own fictional complexities. But yeah, as from a basis of worldview and internal ethics, I would say, there's obviously some closer connection to Delmore.
Sure, sure. I was going to say another option is that, Scott is the total opposite of me,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So Neil, so the first book is No Right Way to Die, and the new book, which just came out a couple of days ago, is Long Arm of the Past. So far, what has been feedback, especially for Long Arm of the Past? I know it's very recent, but I mean, have people, I guess, people who are fans of the first book immediately said, "Oh, there's a new one as continuation of the story." I mean, what has been the feedback, reactions that you've heard from readers?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit, and it has been positive, and it has been, very heartwarming, frankly, that people have, said that they really enjoyed the first book and can't wait to read the second. I just the other day, a review was written in a digital magazine that was very positive about Long Arm of the Past. So that was rewarding, and I was, happy to see that. So yeah, I mean, I think that if you enjoyed the first one, I'm pretty sure you would like the second. So we'll go with that. And the nice thing about having a couple of books out there now is that I'm hoping that, one way or the other, if someone discovers Long Arm of the Past before or only, they can read that, enjoy it as a standalone novel, and then go back and read No Right Way to Die and not have it in any way be spoiled for them. And again, that was something else that I was very conscious of writing Long Arm of the Past, that obviously there had to be some reference, since it's a sequel, to events in the first book, but I did very much want not to include so much
Hmm.
so that it would spoil the reading experiences of No Right Way to Die if you came to book two as your initial exposure.
Right, that's what I was thinking is that it helps you can read Long Arm of the Past on its own, but I think it makes a big difference if you read No Right Way to Die first because it really fleshes out Scott's character a lot. And also there's a lot more background that comes into play later on for Long Arm of the Past. So yeah, it works on its own, but took from my personal experience, I read No Right Way to Die first and then I went to Long Arm of the Past. I think it really the way the story just continues on and again, without going into spoilers, that the end of Long Arm of the Past, it sets it up, something new, but not totally unexpected, which leads to the inevitable question: what is next? I mean, I assume you're working on the next book in this series, and do you have any other projects in development?
I do. Yes. To answer the question directly, I am hopefully close to finishing what would be book three in the
Hmm.
Scott Morgan mystery series. And I have written, and I'm sort of doing some last minute tweaking, a wholly different mystery, whole different set of characters, different ages. Takes place on a Greek island. It's
Oh,
their American PhD archaeology students on a fellowship on a dig on this Greek island, and there's a mysterious death and another kind of amateur detective attempt to find out what happened. So I'm staying in the genre, but have both writing the continuation of the series, but also trying my hand at a standalone novel that is, very, very different.
okay. So I know you're working on the third book in the Scott Morgan series. Do you have a target release date? Is that like about a year from now, or it's just still up in the air?
Still up in the air. I think a year spacing is a good spacing, but it hasn't yet been nailed down.
Hmm. Okay, that is fantastic. Well, Neal Lipschutz, thank you so much for being here today. Where can people find out more about you and if they want to get copies of your two books?
Well, thanks very much, Paul. Yeah, so you can go. I have a website, so it's neallipschutz.com. The books are widely available at any of the big online book retailers, or you can order one through any bookstore. So it's pretty easy to get them anywhere. And you can find out more about me and about the books at my website. That might be the most direct way to do it.
Okay, and and if people want to follow you on any social media platforms, where can they track you down there?
Yeah, LinkedIn and Facebook are where I'm most active. So those would probably be the best places to find me.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we will have all the links. We'll post them on the podcast's social media platforms as well. Neal Lipschutz, thank you so much for being here today. Again, his first book was No Right Way to Die, which led into his new book, Long Arm of the Past. Neal, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, it has been my pleasure as well. And viewers and listeners, if it was a pleasure for you, please hit like and feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. I can talk. The theme music for the audio version of this show is by Mark Gunyon. For my social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, which is at maximumz.blog. This show is on Blue Sky and Instagram at podcastcwl. I am also on Blue Sky and Instagram. Those are at Pez Screenwriting. You can check out my three Go Ahead and Ask books. Those are the ones on Amazon about screenwriting and pie, three very wonderful things. Like I said, that's Neal. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.